Hi folks, and welcome to another Saturday morning Samoflange. I'm Matt, all by myself. That's right, all by myself. Funny thing, Mikey was supposed to be on with me, and I texted him to see if he could make it. The next day he wrote back, he said, yeah, I can make it. And I said, all right, cool. And so I gave him the topics. And then my brother came over. He was going to be another special guest. I was going to have him for one more night on the podcast before he left. He agreed to come back after recording the other two with me. And we waited, and I said, you know what, Mikey's usually late. Let's play a game. So we started playing a game, and meanwhile, during the game, I texted him and said, hey, man, are you on your way? To which he responded, I thought you said tomorrow. I said, yeah, and I sent the text yesterday. So he couldn't make it today, and or for the podcast, and my brother couldn't stay, so because it was already getting late. So that's okay. That's okay, because we had a good one, but I can do it my own. This is one that obviously, if you've seen the title now, you know what it's about. I thought we had done this, but I guess we hadn't. It just was one of those that just kind of got skipped over time as something I know that I had written down as a potential subject, because to me, things from your childhood, things you enjoyed, and one of them was the comic strips. Now, just to be clear, I don't read comic strips anymore. I don't even know if there are comic strips in a newspaper anymore. I'm sure there are, but they still make web strips. But does anyone make money off that? And it's kind of sad, because when the newspaper would come in, and I think on Prince of the Universe we did something about the decline and not practically non-existent newspaper, how newspapers have become non-existent now. No one has them. No one subscribes to them. My parents did in the late 2000s. And they were some of the last people who I knew had one. And then I want to say 2010, Dad just went ahead and let it go. He stopped getting the newspaper altogether because there was just no need for it. And that was kind of sad. Newspapers I know are still around. I see them here or there. I wouldn't want to get a subscription because it's just not worth it. It's not worth the paper and everything. And they don't really report on anything. I think if they did more local news, maybe. The comic strip was always something I used to look forward to every day. And of course, the Sunday Funnies, man, that was like a 3-4 page turner there, reading some of your favorites. I remember there were some I absolutely hated, some I loved, some I was so on. The ones, I didn't think about this, the ones I absolutely hated. One of them would have been Family Circle. I thought they were so dumb. I thought Family Circle was never funny. And for a while, I was taking pictures of Family Circle and putting in my own words and really making it funny, because you can put a one-liner and change the whole scenario of that one picture. But I thought Family Circle was atrocious. Kathy was not funny. It was miserable. That was a dumb comic strip. Another one that was just plain out bad was Marmaduke. I mean, how awful could Marmaduke be? I mean, Marmaduke was never funny, ever. My brother was a Wizard of Id fan, and I really wasn't. I want to say there were some cavemen too. That may have been Wizard of Id too. But he was a Wizard of Id fan. I didn't really like it. The ones that were okay, I'd read them, but didn't really care either way, was Snuffy Smith, Beetle Bailey, kind of like your classics. Hagar the Horrible. We read those, and that it was, you didn't really get much out of it. Interesting enough, I read Blondie all the time for some reason. And I always thought the Dagwood sandwich looked so good. And I think in Universal, they have a little comic strip area where they serve the Dagwood. And, I didn't get it because we'd already eaten, and we already had places to eat in mine, but I definitely would have tried it out. This giant sandwich that probably cost way too much money. But let me see. Worst ones. Garfield was funny every once in a while. It's not on my top 5. I think it had its moments here or there, and we enjoyed the cartoon more than the comic strip. I remember chuckling a few times maybe at Garfield as a kid, but not really that funny. Gosh, I can't remember. I may have named off all the strips besides my top 5 that were in the comic. I'm sure there are others that I'm just forgetting, or ones I just never looked at. But I know the 3 worst that were just never funny. Dilbert I never read. I don't think it was in our newspaper at the time. I know this is a very popular comic strip, like Doonesbury or whatever. There was something else, but we never had that one either. There are a few comic strips on my top 5 that we didn't have in our paper, but my grandmother had in her paper. That was kind of the cool thing. Different newspapers from different regions had different comic strips in them. And I thought that was interesting too. It's like, oh my gosh, what is this? This is a new comic strip. I've never seen this before. Because growing up in a small town, I thought the only comic strips that existed were the ones in my newspaper. Like there weren't any more. If there were, they obviously would have put them in there. Yeah, but I think Marmaduke, Kathy, Family Circle were just atrocious. Those are the ones I couldn't stand. Oh. Man, you know what? Dang, this would be an honorable mention. For Better, For Worse. It was a drama about a family, and they aged. It was the only comic strip where they got older. And I can't remember where we started. I know Mike and his sister were, I think they were teenagers when I started reading it, and then he went to college, then she went to college, and I think he got married, and she became an empty nester. They became empty nesters. I'm sure they're all grown up with grandchildren now. I guess it keeps going. But I remember getting into that drama for some. I mean, it have some funny stuff here and there, but it was interesting because the characters grew up, and I would give that an honorable mention. I don't know if it's that funny, but it was interesting to read. So there's my first honorable mention. Now, I am sad that the comic strip has gone the way of the buffalo. Tied to newspapers, it just didn't stand a chance. There's no reason to buy the newspaper just to see the comic strip. I'm sure maybe, I didn't even check this, you could go online, but 3 or 4, I don't even know if any of these are even made anymore. To be honest, they may have all stopped by now. And I know 3 of them have stopped for sure. But the other ones may have stopped too. A lot of comic strip artists just had to find work somewhere else. But it's sad that it's not there anymore. I don't remember when it stopped being something I read. Probably when I moved out of the house. Up to high school, I was still reading the comic strips. Mainly just my favorite ones. There's like 3 I was reading in our local newspaper. But other than that, I do wish, I am kind of sad that that's a lost art of comics. Anyway, the old comic strip. It inspired me to draw comic strips, through my childhood and adolescence, because that was always fun to do. Try to make 2 or 3 panels, maybe one of a joke or something. But I guess it kind of just, all faded away. I should have done a little bit more homework here and looked up comic strips. And maybe I'll do that if I have a moment here. But getting the Sunday funnies, my dad would always be upset because we'd rip through the newspaper just to get the comic strips or to the comic strips or the Sunday funnies, and he hated that. He hated that. He also hated. I feel like we had a word jumble too, and the word jumble was pretty fun. I'd always do those too when I was older. I'd do that. Okay, here it is. I pulled it up, trying to look at what other ones. Bloom County. That was the other one. We didn't have that one. A lot of these other ones. Oh, it was Nancy. Was that it? No. Yeah, we kind of had Nancy in the Sunday paper. We had different ones in Sunday paper than we did those. I never read that one. BC. My brother enjoyed that one. That was one of his favorites. Dennis the Menace. There was a Dennis the Menace. I didn't really like it unless they showed oddly enough, I like this for Family Circle too. When they showed the little, dashes all around it was one big picture of where they went and what trouble they got into. Dennis the Menace, I'm sure Family Circle started it. And Dennis the Menace kind of kept it, stole it from him every once in a while. But that one was a fun one. Whenever they did that, but other than that, it wasn't that good. Frank and Ernest, I'd forgotten about them. I didn't think they were funny. My grandmother was a big Ziggy fan. I did read Ziggy, and he's all right. Mainly, I would love him just because I remember my grandmother loved him. And out of all these other ones, some of these I'd never even heard of before. So just kind of doing a quick search here. And there's none here that would have made my top 5 that I didn't already know about. So yeah, nothing else here. All right, so there it is. All right, so now I'm ready to give my top 5 here. And by the way, if Mikey would have been here, my prediction would have been a solid 3 comic strips, and it would have been with confidence, because I'm pretty sure he had 3 of these on his list that I have on mine. But the first one did not come out locally for me. I read it at my grandmother's, and like anywhere else I'd go. Both of my grandparents had this comic strip in their local newspaper. It was Foxtrot. Foxtrot, I always called it the poor man's Calvin and Hobbes, but Foxtrot was good for what it was. Little kid with the glasses was funny. It made me laugh a couple of times. I really enjoyed it. I remember later on looking at some of the trades, because a few people had bought them, not around our neck of the woods, but I'd sit there and kind of read a few of them, and I'd enjoy it. I enjoyed them, and they made me chuckle a couple of times. I really wish that would have been in my local newspaper. I remember back in the day, you could write into your newspaper and say, hey, can you add this comic strip? And sometimes they'd respond. Sometimes they'd do it too. And they would petition. I don't remember. They put something in the newspaper a long time ago. Goes, hey, this comic strip's going away. We'd like to know. We'd like to hear from you. Write us at this. And so, old-fashioned letter. I wrote in and I voted for Foxtrot. Now, I was in my early teens, maybe 14, 15, 13, something like that, because I'd enjoyed it, and it didn't win, and I can't remember what won. I can't remember what took its place, but it was something really dumb. Probably what the publisher wanted, because no one wrote in but me, and they're like, I'm going to get something called Foxtrot. But Foxtrot was pretty funny. My number 4 was Spider-Man, the comic strip. I didn't even know this existed. And maybe they'd stopped it and they were just running reruns of the comic strip, but it was in my grandmother's newspaper. And when I first saw it, I did a double take. I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. That's Spider-Man. And it was like you had your own little comic book. Like, I remember I cut them out for the week, and I would be so mad because on Sunday, they'd have a big adventure. But a lot of times, and this is the times I hated it, when it was Peter Parker and Mary Jane talking. Just talking about stuff. And I think at this point they're already married too, because I think this kind of coincided with the comic books. Meaning like whatever was going on in Peter's personal life, him being married to Mary Jane. He's married to Mary Jane in the comic strip too, and they're doing some type of adventure. It probably didn't tie into the comic books, but it took place around the same time. And of course, one adventure probably took months to wrap up. But I can't remember who Spider-Man was fighting. He was fighting one of the villains or whatnot. And on Sunday, you'd have a big old boom, splash page. Now, my grandfather would keep about a week's worth of newspapers. I don't know if your family did this too. My dad would too. There was a stack of newspapers underneath the chair. And he'd throw away the stack. I don't know why we kept newspapers. That's kind of weird now that I think about it. But we never threw away the newspapers until the stack got pretty high, maybe a week or 2 weeks worth. So I would start by reading 2 weeks ago, before my grandfather did this too. He had a stack of newspapers, oddly underneath the coffee table, the little shelf space that's kind of stacked up. And I just read them in order of the date they came out, just to catch up on whatever Spider-Man story was. Sometimes they even cut them out and keep them, just kind of look over the little newspaper strips that I'd cut out. But I wanted to get the whole adventure, and I never could. We never stayed around long enough. And I remember thinking, because we'd leave on a Saturday to get back on a Sunday, or we'd leave a Sunday to get back on a Sunday night, and I'd be like, read the last big splash page on Sunday and then leave. Dad didn't like me cutting up my grandfather's newspaper, so I think I only did that once, and he stopped. I think that upset him that I was cutting up his newspaper, that he wasn't going to read again, just in case I want to go back and read what happened last Monday. But man, I just thought that was incredible. It's like having your own superhero comic book, in the newspaper. And I was like, I didn't even know that existed. And I really wanted our newspaper to pick it up or something, because I thought that would be awesome to see Spider-Man adventures all the time. And I'm sure other superheroes may have had adventures in the comic strip. I don't know. Like I said, I didn't do any study into this. I'm just going off what I remember from my childhood. But that Spider-Man had his own comic strip, I thought was really cool. And the times where sometimes it'd only be like 2 panels. Spider-Man punching and then dodging and saying something real quick. And that's all you got for one day. Then you had to wait till the next day to see how Spider-Man was going to retaliate for that punch Dr. Octopus just landed on him, Or what was really confusing is when they cut away from the action to J. Jonah Jameson for like 2 comic strips. As where's Parker? He needs to take a picture of this menace to society or whatnot. And you're like, what? I don't want to see this. I want to go back to the action. But those are really fun. I'm sure those are collected probably in some, omnibus or trade. And I'm also sure that I never want to read them again. But as a kid, those were amazing. Now, by the way, before you think about this, Star Wars is not on my list. I never got to experience Star Wars, the comic strip. I'm sure it was rerunning back, or it may have been running live in the 80s, early 80s and whatnot, when I was a wee lad. It may have been running, but I never saw it in any of the newspapers. I would have gone nuts over it, though, if I'd have seen it back in the day. But I think a Star Wars comic strip would have been just great. So I never got to read it as a kid. Obviously, I have it collected in trade paperbacks, and I enjoy Russ Manning's work that he did on the series. It's pretty solid stuff, and I'm glad it got comic book treatment and whatnot. But I never read that as a comic strip, which is why that one will not be making my top 5. I thought about it because it is a comic strip, but I never read it in comic strip form. So here at Saturday Morning Samoflange, we have our own rules here, and my rule, I was going to tell this to Mikey, was something that I read in an actual newspaper, not like a trade paperback. Even though I read a lot of trade paperbacks of I read probably more Foxtrot in trade paperback than I did in the newspaper, because only once, twice a year I was reading Foxtrot in the newspaper, because at that point I'd already lost Calvin and Hobbes, which, spoiler alerts, is later on down this list. For right now, Spider-Man number 4. Number 3 is a classic, and I did love it. I read every trade I could get my hands on in the local library. It's Peanuts. Something about the Peanuts characters. I remember I would practice drawing them as a kid, and you can kind of get used to it, especially if you check out a Charlie Brown book at the library. I just basically start copying it. Then you start getting used to how the simplicity of the drawings, and you can draw mainly all the characters. And I would just sit around and just draw each and every character until I had them down pat. I don't know why I do it. I would just do it. I didn't make up my own, Peanuts comic strip. But I just thought it was fun to draw, all the Peanuts gallery. Peanuts to me was fun at times. I love the baseball stuff. I love that Charlie Brown never won. Well, he actually did win a game. I don't know if anyone knows this. He won one game because it was rained out. Well, it didn't officially get canceled. He showed up in the rain, and he sat there on the mound as it was raining, and he didn't know where the other team was. He goes, wait a minute. I think he got a message from Linus or whatnot, who had an umbrella, said, hey, Charlie Brown, sorry. He said, but the other team called. They said they forfeit because they're not going to play in the rain. See you later. And he walks away. He's like, forfeit? How could they forfeit? And then Charlie Brown kind of looks, I guess at you and from the conference room, and goes, that means I won a game. They forfeited. And I was so happy because, they always lost. If they had the lead, Charlie Brown would throw a baseball that would somehow knock all of his clothes off and leave him stranded on his skivvies on the mound. The only thing really they had about football was Lucy, holding the ball for Charlie Brown and then removing it every time. The kite that would get eaten by the tree. The Great Pumpkin, the story of Linus and the Great Pumpkin. That was great stuff too. Snoopy versus the Red Baron. Great stuff. Joe Cool and stuff like that. Schroeder and Sally and stuff like that. All those comic books. Pigpen and Franklin and Patty. I can't remember what her name was now. Marcy, and Peppermint Patty. Great characters. And I remember thinking, okay, who all plays what? Because I remember there was one shot of them all assuming their spots. If I remember right, and I could be wrong, and I guess I don't care really. Schroeder was behind the mound. I know he was the catcher. I'm pretty sure Franklin was third base, or he may have been in the outfield. I think Linus was in the outfield. I think Lucy was in the outfield. I think Sally was first base. Pigpen was shortstop because he just wanted to kick up dirt. Snoopy was Woodstock and Snoopy were in the outfield with Linus, I believe. So that would put look at me. No one even cares about this but me. I think Franklin would be at second and third. Oh no, Peppermint Patty and Marcy were around. Ooh, I can't remember. Woodstock may have been second base, and that may have made sense. Or maybe he was shortstop and Pigpen was second base. Franklin at third. I want to see Franklin was in the infield. Peppermint Patty played. Marcy did not. So it's probably Peppermint Patty, Lucy, and Snoopy in the outfield. I don't know. Where would that put Linus? Dang. Now I have to look it up, see who played what position. But I remember I used to know that, and I always say, here they are at shortstop, whoever, Pigpen or whatnot. And since baseball was my favorite sport, it always comforted me that the Peanuts were always playing baseball, more than anything else. I don't know if they ever played basketball or hockey, and like I said, the only thing about football was him trying to kick that ball from Lucy. But either way, Peanuts is a classic. If you can rent out and I'm sure they have an omnibus collection, and if you can rent that out at the library, get it. I may get it. And I'd like to surf through some Peanuts again. Okay, now these last three, Peanuts I would have thought would be something that Mikey would have. And these other two, I'm pretty positive he also would have had on his top five. Number 2, Far Side. Who doesn't like the Far Side? Far Side, hilarious. Lots of highbrow jokes. My mom's favorite joke, I remember, and probably still is today, is the two sharks going, wait a minute, we've been following a ketchup bottle this whole time? They thought it was blood. My mom just thought it was funny. My dad's favorite Far Side was that kid pushing against a door that said pull, and it said home for special kids or whatnot. Oh man, Dad thought that was hilarious. I don't remember which Far Side I thought was the funniest, but I remember I loved the quirky humor, and that was how to do a one-panel comic strip. That was easy to do one panel. And of course, I read a lot of trades, a lot of collections of the Far Side, and loved them all. But Far Side, really funny stuff. I know there was, once Far Side retired, they had some kind of, comic strip replace it. And it was something like, I don't know, I want to say it was called Off the Mark, although I don't remember. But it was basically just the poor man's Far Side, someone trying to be Far Side. And in my opinion, I read a few, but I thought, this guy's trying to be like Far Side, but he's not. And I'm sure he had some funny ones. I just don't remember them. But I remember thinking, you know what? It was funny when Far Side did this, but now it just looks like someone's just copying their success. And so I didn't really like it and stopped reading it. By the way, I think the reason I stopped reading comic strips completely was when I moved out. Because the newspaper I wasn't going in every day to check on the newspaper, and I wasn't, going to dig through Dad's, underneath Dad's chair and, read all the comic strips I missed. So probably when I graduated high school was when I stopped. But I read comic strips for a very long time. Now, my number 1 is obvious. I've talked about this several times on different podcasts, but Calvin and Hobbes, by far, right? Bill Watterson is excellent. He's a genius. He's someone who could probably save the comic strip, come back and just write more Calvin and Hobbes. Oh my gosh. That would blow up the market. Wouldn't it be great that once if he dies, that he has this whole treasure trove of undrawn Calvin and Hobbes that he just wants to share with the world or something? Oh my goodness. I'd love it to death. But I do have the complete Calvin and Hobbes. I have read this 2 times, and I wanted to do a third, but haven't yet. I love Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin and Hobbes encapsulates my childhood. It does. In a nutshell, like growing up, for me, it was that. I felt like, I think this comic book started in the early 80s or mid 80s and then kept going to the early 90s or mid 90s, and it's beautiful all the way through. I used to think there were boring parts in it, the sentimental parts, but now as an adult, I cherish them even more. I remember I was disappointed when the finale came out. I was like, well, that sucks, like Charles Schultz. I remember his last comic strip was Snoopy typing up a goodbye letter written by Charles Schultz. And I thought, lame. And then when Bill Washington went out, on that, last comic strip that happened on a Sunday, I was so excited to see what it was going to be about. And I thought, there was nothing funny in there. And I kind of walked away disappointed. But then reading it again, it's perfect. It's perfect. come on, pal, let's go exploring. What a way to end it. What a way to end it. It's a brilliant comic strip. If you've never read it, this one, out of all of them, forget all of them, this is number one by leaps and bounds. This is something I would almost say it's required reading for people because it's so fun. There's hilarious moments. To be fair, Spaceman Spiff wasn't my favorite caricature of him. Stupendous Man, who only made maybe 2 appearances. He wasn't that popular a character, but I thought Stupendous Man was hilarious. It's like a Batman-like character. But I was surprised when I reread it again and didn't see that much of Stupendous Man, but I saw a lot of Spaceman Spiff. And Spaceman Spiff is still good, but doesn't hold a candle to Stupendous Man. The comic strip, and that's what it was. I think Benjamin had borrowed it, and we talked about this for a little while. But the comic strip is wonderful. One of my favorite ones is where it has no words. It's Calvin and Hobbes waiting outside their house for the bus to arrive, and they have an umbrella. Calvin leaves, waves goodbye to Hobbes. Hobbes waves goodbye to him. His mom looks out the window and sees the stuffed animal Hobbes, with the umbrella, and goes out and fetches Hobbes. Well, then throughout the day, Calvin is bored looking at the clock. At home, you see Hobbes is bored looking at the clock. And then when Calvin comes home, he's happy again and hugging Hobbes, because he missed his best friend. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. It's a gorgeous comic strip, very sentimental. And all the times he was building snowmen, I remember the hardest I laughed as a kid was the Invasion of the Snow Goons. It's not even that funny now that I'm reading it, but we just thought it was hilarious. The Die Snow Goons Die. I remember me and my brothers would just sit up at night just laughing about that. We go, Die Snow Goons Die, and then we'd laugh and everything because we just loved Calvin. He was what every kid wanted to be. The get rid of slimy girls club, gross. That was hilarious. When Susie kidnapped Hobbes, and Hobbes was happy to have a tea party with Susie. It was great. There's so many excellent moments. In fact, on the internet, you should definitely check this out if you're a Calvin and Hobbes fan, Bacon and Hobbes. Some comic book artist who was inspired by Calvin and Hobbes wrote a few comic strips just for fun called Bacon and Hobbes. It's Calvin as he's married, and he's married to Susie, and they're both adults, and he has a daughter named Bacon for some reason, and she now has Hobbes, and she and Hobbes are best friends now. And this thing came out 20 years ago, I want to say. It's been at least 20 years ago, I think. And so it's and it just was a few comic strips, but it's excellent, and it feels like Bill Watterson, even though it wasn't. It's in it has that feel of it. So I really enjoyed it. I'm sure it's still online today, but Bacon and Hobbes, if you want to see an unofficial sequel. Other than that, like I said, there aren't any other comic strips that I really enjoyed more than Calvin and Hobbes. I do, if you want to buy this, I don't know, I bet it's out of print now, but the complete Calvin and Hobbes is well worth it. I remember my wife gave me it for Christmas, one of my favorite Christmas presents probably of all time, because I love it. The books feel really nice. They're hardbound books, and it's beautiful just to sit up and just start reading them on a rainy day. I love reading, but reading on a rainy day, there's always something special about it. But it's just so wonderful. It takes me back to my childhood. And like I said, it really feels like that's what it was like. You ate the cocoa chocolate covered sugar bombs. I remember scraping that sugar and having that gray, yummy scoop of just pure sugar. We used to do that back in the day. Just get that bowl of sugar and pile it up on top of our sugary cereal. We used to watch TV all the time like Calvin did. There wasn't really video games for us. That was limited, but TV, man, the TV was playing. We wanted to watch our favorite TV and TV shows and cartoons and stuff like that. We would play outside and explore all the time like Calvin would. Now, we never got snow like Calvin wanted, and we never went down the hill in a wheelbarrow because we never had heels or a wheelbarrow to go down them, but we probably would if we had both. But anyway, Calvin and Hobbes, excellent series, my number one. Hey, folks, That's it for now. Let me know in the comments what were your top 5 comic strips, and I'll see you next time on Saturday Morning Samoflange.